Welcome to the Church and Culture Podcast, a weekly discussion with Dr. James Emery White on the latest trends happening in culture and where and how the church should respond. Jim is the founding and senior pastor of Mecklenburg Community Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, president of Serious Times, a ministry devoted to exploring the intersection of faith and culture, former professor of theology and culture at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where he also served as their fourth president, and the author of more than 20 books. I am your host, Alexis Dry, and I can't wait to dive into this week's conversation. All right, hello, and welcome to the Church and Culture Podcast. If you'd been tuning in with us throughout the summer, you probably noticed that Dr. White and I took a bit of a break from our weekly conversations, and that's because we wanted to share some content that's often requested throughout our time on the podcast. So hopefully that served you and was helpful, but I will say I think we're both happy to be back live and jumping back into the headlines. So on the docket for today's conversation is the recent controversy surrounding former HGTV stars Chip and Joanna Gaines. Now, the Gaines couple rose to fame from their home renovation show called Fixer Upper, which aired back in 2013. Just a few years later, they launched a lifestyle magazine called Magnolia Journal, and then they started selling their Hearth and Hand Magnolia collection, which features interior design products, in Target stores. In 2019, they announced their departure from HGTV and the launch of a new network. That's the Magnolia Network, which finally debuted in 2022. But just last month, many of their fans turned on them after they featured a same-sex couple on their show Back to the Frontier. Now, same-sex couples on TV shows are hardly uncommon nowadays. So why have the Gaines received so much backlash, and from whom?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, it's from Christians, and it's because they felt that since Chip and Joanna Gaines were also Christians, featuring a gay couple was not in line with that shared Christian faith. Specifically, if it was going to celebrate their relationship or mainstream it instead of using their platform to somehow condemn it.
Well, in response to the criticism, Chip Gaines, he went on X, and I brought what he wrote. He said, talk, ask questions, listen, maybe even learn. Too much to ask of modern American Christian culture. Judge first, understand later, or never. And then he added, it's a sad Sunday when non-believers have never been confronted with hate or vitriol until they are introduced to a modern American Christian. Jim, what do you gather that he was trying to argue for, and what do you make of his position?
I think it was an unfortunate response because, granted, it may be true. But it's kind of an easy shot, a lot of people who critiqued him or them platforming a gay couple in a very complimentary, mainstreaming way weren't critiquing it with hate. They were just saying, hey, is that best? But what he's arguing for, let's get his main thing is just not being judgmental. It's the typical don't be judgmental. And I don't want to appear that I know the man. What little I've seen of Chip and Joanna, they're really likable people. I don't have any truck with them. But if that's his case, that this is just about don't be judgmental, we can platform someone on this and you do that. I think he's both right and wrong. And I think it's important for us to be a little more nuanced in our understandings here and in our critiques and our engagement. Let's get the right part down. Judgmentalism in the Bible is condemned. And that part's absolutely right. It couldn't have been, more condemned than by Jesus and his Sermon on the Mount. It was in that message that he talked about how in the same way we judge others, we will be judged. And he talked about looking at the speck of sawdust in someone's eyes and ignoring the 2x4 in your own. And Jesus just said, look, don't do it. Do not judge, period. That's God's job. That is not our job. But here's where, again, I'm not going to assume that I know what his intent was or his thinking was behind the Twitter response, the X response. But here's where I think he may have gotten potentially wrong about judgmentalism. Not being judgmental does not mean we don't make value judgments. Some things are wrong and some things are right. This is not about never taking a stand. It isn't about being a moral wimp. Some people think that acceptance means mindless affirmation. That's just intellectually vacuous. That's just simply, not a carefully reasoned thought. If someone came up to me and said, I believe the best way for you to optimize the performance of your laptop is to remove your antivirus protection and take down your firewall and, open up every attachment from people and companies you don't know. Download as much free software from sites you've never heard of. I would say I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Is that being judgmental? Well, of course not. Not in the sense that we deplore it in society. If you want to avoid being judgmental, it's not about refusing to believe something or refusing to hold to something or stand for something. It's not about refusing to say you feel that something is right or wrong or good or bad. It's not about giving up thinking or giving up discernment or giving up wisdom. In fact, let's go further. It's not even about never warning someone. If someone you care about is living in a way that is destroying their life, if I don't ever say anything to them, I don't love them very much. I really don't. If someone can't see where they're walking and they're getting ready to step off a cliff, love would compel me to say, stop, and run and tackle them even if I had to. It's not judgmental to tell someone who thinks they're reaching for Visine for their dry eyes when they're actually reaching for carbolic acid. It's not judgmental to say, to intervene, to stop, to say, no, you're getting the wrong thing. That's going to make you blind. That's not being judgmental. That's caring for somebody enough to tell them the truth. Judgmentalism is different than that. It's the practice of personal condemnation. John Stott, in his masterful exposition on the Sermon on the Mount, actually, described it. I've always stuck with me as one of the best ways. He just said, you're really talking about the fault finder. You're really talking about the person who's negative and destructive toward other people and enjoys actively seeking out failure and seeking out their failings, and who puts the worst possible spin or construction on their motives and pours cold water on their dreams and is ungenerous toward their mistakes. It's making yourself out to be God and to take on God's role as judge of their lives. That's why Jesus said, if you judge others, you will be judged. That was the impetus of that. Because the heart of a judgmental attitude is to assume yourself to be morally superior and so that you can take over God's role in someone else's life. Jesus says, fine, if you do that, expect to be judged accordingly. You're going to be judged the same way. God will judge you on the basis of whether or not you measure up to the standard required for judging, which is being God yourself, and nobody wants that. But that's very different than saying, warning or taking a stand or having values.
What's interesting is that back in 2016, the Gaines couple were actually criticized by mainstream media for being against same-sex marriage.
Mm.
Now, there wasn't any evidence that was offered to show that they'd actually discriminated against anyone, but the fact that they were associated with a church that stood against same-sex marriage was enough to condemn them. But now they're in the hot seat with Christians for promoting same-sex marriage. And so I think a lot of people are wondering, where is the line between affirming the basic human dignity and worth of a person and promoting their lifestyle choices? And you brought in the Bible in the last question, so I'm interested, what insight does the Bible offer here?
This is such an important question. And I find myself having to answer this question over and over again, coming at it from people raising the question in different ways, but the answer is always the same. To get the message of Jesus right, to get grace right, you have to understand it's not just about grace. This is critical. It's about grace and truth. You want the biblical basis? It's John 1. Jesus came bearing both grace and truth. They are inextricably intertwined. Jesus accepted, for example, the woman caught in adultery that was going to be stoned, one of the most famous scenes from the New Testament. He accepted her as someone who mattered to him, but never did he affirm the life she'd been living. Never. No, there was never any affirmation. And people who make the jump from acceptance or even grace to affirmation didn't read the story well. Jesus didn't condemn her for what she did, but he didn't condone what she did either. Personal acceptance was never combined with lifestyle affirmation. Grace and truth always went together, which means Jesus comes to our defense when we're about to get stoned, but he's also the first one to tell us, stop sleeping around. Or stop anything else that is not God's plan for doing life optimally. Psychologist Henry Cloud, I remember reading how he put it. It's always stuck with me. He said, grace is accepting relationship. Truth is what is real. It determines the way things really are. And he went on to say, truth without grace is just judgment, but grace without truth is just licentiousness. It's just deception. Here's how I've tried to explain it too. It may not be the best analogy, but grace is like a Band-Aid. It's meant to be applied to something. But this is where we get it wrong. And hear me out on this because this could be misunderstood. It is not to be applied directly to sin. Grace is not meant to be applied directly to sin. Grace is applied to a desire for life change, repentance. And from that repentance, it's applied to sin. It's applied to someone who screws up, but who admits they have screwed up. This is what keeps it from being cheap. Almost every story Jesus told dripped with this one message. If you are far from God, you can come home. You can come home. And when you do, you'll be met with grace and then challenged with the truth that we all so desperately need. Which brings us back to basic issues related to acceptance and tolerance. And let's just cut right to the chase of it. The acceptance of people in the LGBTQ plus community. I've been asked so many times if I am accepting of gays or if the church I lead is accepting of gays. That's usually the way it's phrased. And my answer has always been, well, of course. I mean, next question. I mean, why wouldn't we be accepting of gay people? There's no doubt that there have been Christians who, both in the past and today, who have been unloving and even hateful toward members of the LGBTQ community or relationally rejecting of them. That is their sin. That is their sin. We're called as Christ followers to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. And if you think about the fruit of the Spirit they're really verbs, and they're meant to be applied toward people and situations. You know, loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind, good, faithful, self-controlled, all the patient, all these things are meant to be applied toward people. And of course, as 1 Corinthians 13 reminds us, the greatest of these is love. And so God cares deeply about every human being on this planet. He loves them and he wants to be in relationship with them, period, which means that every single person should be welcome at an authentically Christian church and met with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and goodness and faithfulness and self-control, and met with all those things. They should be accepted. They should be loved. They should be cared for. But here's where it gets tricky. And it's tricky for any number of lifestyles. As we talked about earlier, if you want to make a case that acceptance, that I've just been making a case for, but that acceptance means affirmation. See, that's what people mean when they say, are you accepting of gays? Yes. But what they're saying is, are you affirming of gays? That's the code. And that's where we have to say, no, I'm not affirming of their lifestyle. If you want to make acceptance mean affirmation, then that's a separate conversation we're happy to have. And, any one of the pastors at MEC will be happy to have that conversation with you. But it's a separate conversation. Acceptance and affirmation are just two totally different things. They really are. But regardless of whether the subsequent conversation plays out to everyone's liking, we will always love, we will always care, we will always accept. And you, relationally, as a human being, but not necessarily your lifestyle. The invitation really that we're extending to you in the midst of our acceptance and love is this. We're extending the invitation for you to figure out where you stand with Jesus and how he applies to your life. That's really the ultimate question. When people want to start off with talking about LGBTQ or gender issues or environmental things or immigration or whatever, they want to start off with some question. And from that, try to challenge the Christian faith or see if they want to be accepting of the Christian faith. I always say, look, time out. Here's the invitation, and here's where you need to start. You need to start with Jesus. After you figure that out, where you stand with Jesus, who he is, who you think he is, you have to decide either to walk away from it all, walk away from him, like I don't believe he was who he said he was. And if you do, then all the other conversations are irrelevant. Why would we spend any time on anything else? You've just rejected the Christian faith. What do you care where we stand on these other issues? What do you care? You've just rejected Jesus. So move on to somewhere else. Or you then begin exploring, if you accept Jesus was who he said he was, okay. Now then the task is to explore what Jesus had to say about all kinds of things in your life and all kinds of issues, including choices we make about sex. Don't get this out of order. Christians are not elevating sex above everything else or any other issue. We're trying to elevate Jesus. But you can't get this out of order, because there is no point in having any conversation about anything until you settle where you stand with Jesus. Sometimes I put it this way to people. Let's say that you're drawn to the idea of getting fit and losing weight. So you hear about a fitness program that involves a high protein and a low carb diet, coupled with a combination of cardio and strength resistance training. You have a visceral reaction to the exclusion of carbs because it seems intolerant. So you reject the entire plan. Wouldn't it be wiser to first, before you reject it, assess whether the plan itself works? If it does, perhaps you can come back and reassess what it says about carbs. I know this is a weak analogy, as there's a significant difference between carbs and people, but let's play with the principle, namely the importance we give to tolerance. Today, being tolerant is just a cardinal virtue. When you push people what they mean by tolerance, you'll hear things like hear them say something about the importance of being accepting of others and respectful of their opinions and respectful of their lifestyles. And I would totally agree with that. But push them even further, and you find that what they're really after is the affirming of all ideas and affirming all choices and affirming all lifestyles as equally valid, true, and right. That's what tolerance means. Not just accepting, but affirming and saying they're all right. Is me saying that whatever you want to do or believe, that's good. That's right. That's noble. I'm affirming it, and specifically affirming whatever choice they might have made as being good, moral, upright, and pleasing to God. Okay, that's where I have a problem. I'm not tolerant that way. I'm not. I'm flamingly intolerant when it comes to that. And I really don't think that person I'm talking to is particularly tolerant either. We've talked about this several times on this podcast, Lex, but it bears repeating because it is such an important understanding. And if people are just dialing in with us for the first time or have only dabbled here and there, it's worth going over. There are three kinds of tolerance. Okay. The first is legal tolerance. If you are an American, for example, this has to do with your basic First Amendment rights to believe what you want to believe. There is nothing in what Jesus says or what the Bible teaches that is against that idea. In fact, the Bible is a great advocate of legal tolerance. Second kind of tolerance is social tolerance. This is accepting someone else as a human being, regardless of what they believe, interacting with them with love and exhibiting a relational openness to them as a fellow human being. Nothing in the Christian faith stands against that either, no matter what their lifestyle is. If Jesus stood for anything, it was open, loving acceptance of others as people who mattered to God, no matter their lifestyle. He was so well known for reaching out to those, for example, who had been rejected by society for their lifestyle, the prostitutes, the marketplace scoundrels, the thieves, that he was given the nickname, the friend of sinners. They didn't say that to be nice. They weren't complimenting him. It was basically a way of calling him a son of a female dog. And I'll let you fill in the blank. It was a term of enormous derision. In the religious establishment of that day, if you spent time with a sinner, that meant that you were embracing their sin as well. It meant that you were affirming their sin and actually engaging in it yourself, probably. In their minds, you were obviously also a prostitute. You're obviously also a thief. That was what it meant. They were ridiculing Jesus because he was so relationally accepting, even to the point of eating with these people in their homes. In the ancient world, I think you and I have talked about this in other settings, table fellowship was considered an act of enormous intimacy in that day, arguably among the closest of intimacies. This helps explain the betrayal, for example, that like David felt when he spoke of those with whom he had shared bread, who then later turned against him. And that's actually written. He writes about that in the Psalms. Or the pain that Jesus felt when his disciple Judas immediately after taking the bread from his hand, the table fellowship moment, went out into the night to claim the 40 pieces of silver for handing Jesus, or 30 pieces of silver over to be arrested. To eat with anyone, and particularly a sinner, was far more than simply sharing a meal. It signified welcome and recognition and acceptance. It simply was not to be done, not even in the name of redemption. In fact, there was an old rabbinic saying that would talk about how you shouldn't associate with the wicked, even if it was to bring him near to the law. And the exact opposite of Jesus' missiological approach. This is why we read of the shock and the dismay of the religious establishment that Jesus was virtually indiscriminate when it came to who he ate with. It signified welcome, recognition, acceptance. It was saying to the world, this is someone I value. This is someone I is my friend. That's the model for all who follow Jesus. So legal tolerance, relational tolerance, these are deep Christian virtues, if nothing else. The third kind of tolerance is intellectual tolerance. This is accepting any and every idea as being equally valid, good, right, and true. That's where Christianity draws a line. And without being condescending, I think anyone who thinks it through would draw the line there as well. I remember being on a plane to Las Vegas, and a woman boarded the flight. She had like a tank top on. And I remember she had this huge tattoo on her shoulder that said F the world. But she had all 4 letters of the F word spelled out. F the world, prominently on display. I fully support that young gal's right to have that tattoo. I support her right to display it. I would be happy to be in a loving and accepting relationship with her as a friend. But I absolutely don't agree with what she had inscribed on her body as a guiding life philosophy, and would actually enjoy the opportunity to talk to her about it. Later that same day, we would walk between the hotels, internally, but there was a time where we had to get out on the strip to get to where we were going to some show or something. And there were lines of men wearing T-shirts waiting on the sidewalk that said, "Girls delivered to your room in 20 minutes or less." They were trying to hand me, even though I was right there with my wife, they were trying to hand me this little card with a picture of a naked woman on it and a phone number advertising an escort service. I don't embrace that as the optimal expression of God's design for my sexual fulfillment, neither for me nor for the men and women, those precious souls involved. Is that being intolerant? Sure, it is. It's being flamingly intolerant. Not socially, not legally, but intellectually. The point is that I don't believe that everything is equally right or equally valid. There is right and wrong, true and false, good and bad, smart and dumb. But I think that's where all of us are at. When I've had conversations with people about this, and they're tracking with me, but and I can tell that their wheels are turning, and so then I just kind of say, okay, so do you really believe in intellectual tolerance? And they want to hold on to it because they know that the implications would be pretty dramatic if they said, well, you're right, we need to draw a line there, because then that would mean people have a right to speak in a society or culture about various things. But I push them. I said, do you really want to say that all ideas are equally valid, should be treated as such? When we talk about the importance of tolerance, we mean legal or social, but we're not talking intellectual. And then I push them. I said, and isn't this true for lifestyle issues as well? If the only kind of acceptance that you will accept involves uncritical affirmation, then you're saying the only kind of tolerance that you will accept includes intellectual tolerance. This would mean that any and every lifestyle choice must be affirmed as equally good and safe and vibrant and fulfilling and holy as any other. And then I'll just ask him, I said, can't you think of even one lifestyle practice that you would personally reject, not just for you, but for everyone? Can't you think of even one? Like maybe something involving a child? Can't you think of even one that universally we could say, that's wrong? That's a lifestyle that's wrong, unequivocally. And we would universally be intolerant? I think we could. Christianity walks a fine but important line, as most of us do, on any number of lifestyle issues in relation to the people involved in light of legal, relational, and intellectual tolerance. It's a line bathed in both grace and truth, just as is true of the entire Christian message. Long answer, but I think we needed to go there.
Yeah, worthwhile. Thank you. I did find it interesting. So there's a New York Times opinion piece that was written by David French, and he pointed out a bit of hypocrisy that he perceived between the Christian condemnation of the Gaines decision to feature a same-sex couple from a lot of the same voices who unashamedly approve of, for example, political candidates or celebrities known for their morally abhorrent lifestyles. What do you make of that argument? Do you see a hypocrisy there?
He has a point, doesn't he?
Hmm.
He has a point. I mean, we can't have it both ways. We can't trash people over what we would consider ethical lapses of misjudgment and then not trash people for the same things or even worse. I don't like the word trash. I mean, like make assessments. We can't make this moral assessment over here, but then turn a blind eye over there just because, I don't know, playing favorites or ideological reasons or whatever. That double standard reeks of not just hypocrisy, but a lack of true morals, which transcend ideology. Theology speaks to ideology. A real moral center to our lives and to our theology. If it's wrong, it's wrong, no matter who does it. If it's a disqualifier, it's a disqualifier, no matter who does it. The means do not justify the ends. And so I think the world does have a sense where it rightfully smirks at when even a rightful judgment is made and expressed, but then they see us not making rightful judgments in other places where it might just be awkward or inconvenient. And so, yeah.
Hmm. And then finally, what do you think the non-Christian world is making of just watching all of this criticism unfold against the Gaines? And let me add one more layer to that. What responsibility do Christians have to a non-Christian world regarding the way that we publicly handle disputes?
Well, I just kind of alluded to the fact that we ought to at least be consistent in our morality. But I'll be honest with you. I doubt the world pays much attention to the criticism Christians brought to the Gaines, but I think they paid a lot of attention to its tenor. Let me chase something here. When we disagree with each other, I mean, most of the things that Christians disagree about, the world just doesn't care about. It's like over issues that they don't care about, so they don't care if we're fighting about it. But they do pay attention to how we fight, how we argue, how we disagree. When we disagree with each other, we have two choices. We can maintain the ultimate mark of the Christian, or we can abandon and betray it. In the biography of Jesus, written by John, we have the poignant final words and prayers of Jesus to his disciples before his death on the cross. It's captured between John 13 and John 17, those chapters. It's considered by many to be among the most moving sections of the entire New Testament. So what occupied Jesus during the moments before his death? Two things, largely. Not surprisingly, he wanted the world to know that his death was sacrificial, that he was laying down his life for theirs, paying the price for their sins, offering his death as a gift, and so that they would receive forgiveness and enter into a full, intimate relationship with God the Father. But how would that happen? How would people know beyond a doubt that what Jesus was offering was coming from God? How would they know that there was a stamp of the transcendent on this? What would cut through the secularity? How would they know that Jesus himself was God, the Son, in human form? How would it be authenticated in a way that would be unmistakable and would force people to reckon with it? Well, many would say, well, obviously the resurrection. They would not be wrong. That's not what Jesus suggested, though. I mean, he did say, that's the sign I'm going to give you. But it's not what he said in his high priestly prayer at the end would really arrest the attention of the world for generations to come. He said on the night before he died that the one thing that would arrest the attention before a watching world would be the observable love among his followers for each other. That would be it. That would be it. And to drive that home, he first commanded that they love each other in John 15, and then prayed specifically for it at the end in John 17. To Jesus, the observable love between those who called themselves his followers was absolutely everything. Everything. It would be that unity that would arrest the world's attention and confirm that he was from the Father. We often marvel at the growth of the early church. I've said this in many settings because it stands out to me. We marvel at the growth of the early church and the explosion of faith in such numbers that in a blink of history, it became the official, Roman Empire officially turned from paganism to Christianity in just, a nanosecond. We look for formulas and programs. We look for services and processes. The simple truth is that they fleshed out exactly what Jesus told them to do and prayed for them to do. And the thing that stands out to me was something I read from a second century writer named Tertullian, who said the odd, mouth dropped open pagan reaction to the Christian communal life was, see how they love one another. Like, it was mind boggling, the love. When the Bible talks about loving unity, it does not mean uniformity, which is everyone looking and thinking alike. The biblical idea of unity is certainly not unanimity, which is complete agreement about every little petty issue across the board of things. No, by unity, the Bible means first and foremost a relational unity, being kind to one another and gracious to one another and forgiving of one another and not assuming the worst or shooting the wounded or being quick to be suspicious. Biblical unity is about working through conflicts and avoiding slander and gossip and being generous in spirit. It's fleshing out the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians that I've mentioned a couple of times, as well as 1 Corinthians 13, where it says, love is everything. And you can have all these other attributes in place. I've been reflecting on 1 Corinthians 13 of late, and we get that section in the middle about love is patient, love is kind, love is not irritable, quick, all those kinds of things. The section above it, to me, is equally convicting, where it says, look, you can have all knowledge. You can give everything away to the poor. You can die a martyr's death for the name of Jesus and have nothing if you don't love. Francis Schaeffer once said this is, as I mentioned, the mark of the Christian, is love. Not just a feeling of love and acknowledgement of love, but an actual demonstration of love. It's a litmus test Jesus gave to the world by which to judge us. The world cares little for doctrine. It really does. It doesn't care about doctrine. The one thing that will arrest the attention of the world is the love that we show. And not just for people we like or who are like us, not just for people in our tribe or our party or our denomination or whatever, our little, political grouping or something like that. He meant the mark of Christians' love for Christians. Period. And then from that for others. But is that what the world is seeing? No, they're not. I mean, they see people who feel like, I remember reading an editorial in Christianity Today where the guy says, some of the language was, he said, it's like there are people who feel like they're the self-appointed attack dogs of Christendom. They seem determined to savage their opponents and fellow believers because they don't approve of some doctrinal position or something. They when you go through the internet, you see websites so drenched in sarcasm and animosity that an agnostic looking at that, or somebody who follows another faith tradition, would look at that and think, if that what it means to be a Christian, they would be permanently disillusioned. And that's exactly what Jesus commanded and prayed against. I guess that's what I would say about the non-Christian question.
Gosh, it's good to be back. And I'll tell you, if you're listening, we have been banking some really great ideas for conversations over the summertime that we are anxious to have in the coming weeks. So we hope you'll join us for them. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll catch you next week.